My wife told her friends I was dead. Not separated. Not gone. Dead. They shared condolences, spoke about my sudden passing, and planned a kiddie party inside the condo they believed now belonged to her alone. There was sympathy, quiet laughter, and talk of moving forward. What none of them knew was that I was still alive, still legally listed as the owner, and still watching every lie stack up. And when I finally walked in with my solicitor beside me, the story they buried me with didn't survive the truth that followed. Before I tell you how it reached that point, do me one small favor, stay with me through the whole story, leave a comment about where you're listening from, and support the channel so stories like this don't disappear the way I almost did. I'm 37 years old. I wake up early, drink my coffee black, and pay my bills on time. I don't disappear easily. But according to my wife's social circle, I'd been dead for nearly 18 months. I didn't find out through family. There was no dramatic phone call, no confrontation, no argument that slipped too far. I found out because someone forgot to lock a shared document. I was sitting alone in my rented apartment, a small place I moved into after my wife asked for space, scrolling through emails while reheating leftovers. That was when a notification popped up from a mailing list I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Support and condolences for Rhea." I clicked it without thinking. The message was written in soft, sympathetic language. It talked about how strong my wife had been. How unfair it was to lose a husband so young. How everyone was glad she was finally smiling again and hosting a kiddie party at the condo to feel normal after such a devastating loss. I reread the line twice. Lose a husband. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with something colder. I scrolled further. There it was, written plainly, casually, like it was a settled fact. Rhea's husband passed away suddenly last year. Suddenly. I laughed once, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet apartment. I was very much alive. I'd argued with my internet provider that morning. I still had a dentist appointment next week. Dead men don't worry about overdue credit cards. But the laughter faded quickly. Because this wasn't confusion. It wasn't gossip. It was consistent. Every message, every reply, every follow-up spoke about me as if I were already buried. I didn't call my wife right away. I didn't text. I didn't even feel angry yet. I felt alert. I went back through the past year with new eyes. The way she stopped tagging me in photos. The way friends stopped asking how I was. The way I'd been quietly removed from group chats and social plans. The way conversations about paperwork were always brushed aside with, "I've got it handled." She hadn't just pushed me away. She'd erased me. The condo came to mind immediately. Lakeview Crest Condominiums. I bought it 6 years ago, before the marriage paperwork was finalized. My name alone was on the deed. When we married, it became our place in practice, but not on paper. At the time, that felt like trust. Now, it felt like foresight. When we separated, not divorced, just separated, I moved out temporarily. At least, that's what I told myself. I kept paying my share. I kept records. I believed space would turn into clarity. Instead, space had turned into a funeral. I opened my laptop and logged into the county property records. My hands were steady. I needed facts, not assumptions. The record loaded. Owner, Ethan Caldwell. Status, active. I let out a slow breath. Relief came first. Then something else caught my attention, a request history. Certified copies of the deed had been pulled 3 months earlier. Not by me. That was the moment the story shifted from strange to deliberate. I started digging. Social media came next. I didn't have to look hard. Photos from gatherings I wasn't invited to. Smiling faces. Wine glasses. Decorations. All inside the condo. My couch. My walls. My space. Captions talked about healing. About moving on. About life after loss. Loss. In one picture, my wife stood in the living room laughing, surrounded by friends. Someone had commented, "You're so strong after everything." Another replied with a heart emoji. I wasn't just gone. I was being used as a backstory. That night, I didn't sleep much. I didn't drink. I didn't pace. I documented. Screenshots. Dates. Names. Quietly, carefully. Every piece of evidence felt like a thread, and I could already see the outline of the web they'd spun. 2 days later, I sat across from a solicitor. Victor Langford didn't waste time on sympathy. He listened, asked precise questions, and reviewed everything I brought. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost clinical. "Socially declaring someone dead is disturbing," he said. "But what matters is whether anyone tried to make it legal." That's when the fear hit, sharp and focused. We checked everything. Deed. Mortgage. Power of attorney filings. Nothing had changed, yet. On paper, I was still alive, still the owner, still in control. But intent was clear. She's hosting an event at the condo next week, Victor said, tapping one of the screenshots. A kiddie party. If she's presenting herself as a widow in your property, that's a problem. But it's also an opportunity. I looked at him. An opportunity for what? To correct the narrative. I went home and sat in the dark, replaying the past year. How easily people accepted my absence once it was explained away. How silence had been mistaken for confirmation. I opened my phone again and reread the first email. Widowed so young. They'd mourned me without asking. Celebrated without consent. Built plans on the assumption that I would never walk back in. I typed one sentence into my notes and stared at it for a long time. If I'm dead, I decide how I come back. That was when I agreed to the plan. We wouldn't warn anyone. We wouldn't argue ahead of time. We'd show up exactly when the lie was most comfortable, when no one expected resistance. Alive. Documented. Impossible to ignore. And that was only the beginning of what they'd set in motion by declaring me gone while I was still breathing. The week leading up to the kiddie party passed in a strange, stretched-out way, like time was waiting for something to snap. I went about my days like normal, work, groceries, gym, but everything felt sharpened. Every sound landed harder. Every quiet moment felt loaded. When someone has already buried you in their mind, you start moving differently. More deliberate. Less forgiving. I didn't contact my wife. Not once. That silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. Victor and I met again 2 days before the event. Same office, same plain wooden table, same neat stacks of paper that now carried far more weight than anyone attending that party realized. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were certified copies of the deed, current tax receipts, HOA statements, and a notarized affidavit confirming sole ownership. Everything clean. Everything undeniable. She's been careful, Victor said. No illegal transfer yet. No forged signatures. But she's been laying groundwork, social, financial, narrative. That's often the first step. I nodded. I already understood that part. Once people accept a story emotionally, the paperwork usually follows quietly. There's one more thing, Victor added. He turned his laptop toward me and played a short clip. It was a video posted in a private group. My wife stood in the condo living room, smiling softly, glass of wine in hand. Someone off camera asked how she was holding up. She sighed, the practiced kind. Some days are harder than others, she said. But I'm learning to move forward. He would have wanted that. He. Past tense. I didn't feel rage. I felt resolve settle in deeper. She believes it, I said. Victor nodded. Or she needs everyone else to. We agreed on the timing. We wouldn't arrive at the beginning. That would feel confrontational. We wouldn't arrive at the end. That would feel defensive. We'd arrive when the lie was fully relaxed, mid-conversation, mid-laughter, mid-assumption. The day of the kiddie party arrived bright and unremarkable. That felt fitting. No storms. No warnings. I dressed simply. Dark jeans. Button-down shirt. Nothing dramatic. Victor wore a neutral suit and carried the folder under his arm like it was just another workday. To him, it was. To me, it felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. We parked down the block. I sat in the car for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the building. Lakeview Crest looked the same as it always had. Clean balconies. Potted plants. The faint sound of laughter drifting from an open window. From my window. You ready? Victor asked. I nodded. I'd been ready since the day I learned I was dead. We walked in through the front entrance. No security. No gate. Just a familiar hallway that smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood. I recognized the sound of voices before I saw anyone. High-pitched laughter. Glass clinking. Comfortable noise. The condo door was open. Inside, about a dozen women stood in small clusters. Cards on the table. Snacks laid out on platters I'd bought years ago. Decorations hung casually, like this was a place everyone belonged. My wife stood near the kitchen counter, holding court. She looked relaxed. Confident. Alive in a way she hadn't been with me in years. No one noticed us at first. Then someone did. It was subtle. A pause in laughter. A glance that lingered too long. A smile that didn't finish forming. My wife turned last. Her face didn't drain of color. It didn't contort. It went still. Like a mask set down too quickly. The room went quiet in stages. I stepped forward before anyone could speak. Hi, I said evenly. Sorry to interrupt. Every eye in the room locked onto me. Confusion came first. Then recognition. Then something closer to fear. One woman whispered, "But, didn't you?" My wife recovered fast. I'll give her that. She set her glass down carefully. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I live here," I replied calmly. "Legally." Victor stepped beside me, placing the folder on the table. My client is Ethan Caldwell, he said, voice clear, professional. The sole registered owner of this property. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone laughed nervously. This isn't funny. It's not a joke, Victor said, opening the folder. He slid a document forward. This is the deed. Current. Verified. My wife shook her head slowly. This is a misunderstanding. I met her eyes. You told people I was dead. Silence dropped hard. One of the women stepped back. Another looked at my wife, then at me, like her brain was struggling to catch up. That's not what I said, my wife replied quickly. I said we lost him. You said I passed away, I said. More than once. Victor turned the laptop around and pressed play. Her voice filled the room. Soft. Sympathetic. Past tense. No one spoke. The weight of the lie settled in real time. I didn't know, someone said quietly. My wife's composure cracked just slightly. This is inappropriate, she said. You're embarrassing me. I didn't raise my voice. You erased me. That's dramatic, she snapped. Declaring someone dead isn't dramatic, Victor said. It's actionable. A woman near the window whispered, so, you're alive. I nodded. Very. The mood had shifted completely now. Chairs scraped. Someone picked up their purse. No one was smiling. My wife's eyes darted around the room, searching for support. She didn't find it. You need to leave, she said to me. Victor smiled thinly. Actually, everyone else does. He slid another document forward. This is a formal notice. Unauthorized use of property under false representation. My wife stared at the paper. You can't do this. I already did, I said. One by one, the women began to leave. Apologies murmured. Awkward glances. No one met my wife's eyes. Within minutes, the condo was quiet again. Just the three of us. She laughed then, sharp and brittle. You really planned this? Yes, I said. Because you planned mine. She crossed her arms. You're overreacting. I looked around the room. You held awake without a body. Her mouth opened, then closed. Victor gathered the papers. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. We turned to leave. At the door, I paused and looked back at her. For the first time since this started, I saw something like uncertainty on her face. You should have just asked for space, I said quietly. Instead, you buried me. I didn't wait for a response. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because it was over, but because it had finally begun. What neither of us said out loud was what came next. The social lie had collapsed. Now the legal and financial ones would have to surface. And they always do. The silence after we left the condo followed me for days. Not the peaceful kind, the loaded kind. The kind that hums beneath your skin and reminds you that something unfinished is circling closer. I didn't go back to the condo that night. I didn't need to. The message had landed exactly where it needed to. What I wanted now wasn't shock. It was clarity. The first call came the next morning. Not from my wife. From someone I didn't recognize. Is this Ethan Caldwell? A woman asked, cautious. Yes. This is Nina from the Lakeview Crest HOA board. We received a few inquiries last night. I leaned back in my chair. About me being alive? A pause. About ownership. Of course. She explained that multiple residents had contacted the board after the kiddie party ended abruptly. Confusion spreads fast when lies collapse in public. People start asking questions, and questions demand answers. I'd like to come in and clarify things, I said. Please, she replied. Relief slipped into her voice. That would be helpful. 2 hours later, I sat in a bland conference room across from 3 board members who suddenly looked very interested in the paperwork they'd previously ignored. Victor joined me remotely. The deed, the payment records, the utility statements, everything lined up. No transfer was ever approved, Nina said quietly. No sale. No change in residency. Correct, Victor replied. Which means the narrative being circulated was false. They exchanged looks. We weren't aware, another board member said. I believe that, I said calmly. That's why I'm here. The meeting ended with formal acknowledgements, a corrected resident record, and one important detail: my wife was no longer listed as the primary contact. That mattered more than they realized. The next call came from the bank. They'd flagged unusual inquiries on the condo's equity line. Someone had asked about refinancing options based on marital status and survivorship. Not illegal, yet. But close enough to raise interest. Victor handled that one. I listened quietly as he shut the door on any future attempts. By noon, the story had shifted. I wasn't dead anymore. I was estranged. Complicated. Back. I let them use whatever word helped them sleep. That evening, my wife finally called. I watched the phone ring twice before answering. What do you want? Her voice was tight. I want the truth, I said. But it's probably too late for that. You humiliated me, she snapped. You held a memorial without my consent. That wasn't, she stopped herself. Change tactics. Why are you doing this? I thought about that for a moment. Because you decided my absence was more convenient than my presence. Silence stretched. I needed to move on, she said finally. Then you should have divorced me, I replied. Not erased me. She hung up. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steadier. That mattered more. Over the next week, pieces began falling into place, quietly, predictably. Friends stopped calling her. Invitations dried up. People don't like being tricked into mourning someone who's still alive. It makes them question their own judgment. I, on the other hand, received messages I hadn't expected. One woman from the kiddie party apologized. Another admitted she'd felt uncomfortable but hadn't asked questions. Someone else confessed they'd helped my wife draft the story because it sounded easier. Easier. Truth is rarely convenient. Victor and I met again at the end of the week. This time, his tone was different, more focused. She's trying to regain control, he said. Nothing illegal yet, but she's reaching out. Testing boundaries. How? I asked. By playing the victim. That didn't surprise me. She's told people you showed up unstable, Victor continued. That you're struggling. That she was protecting you. I laughed softly. So now I'm not dead. I'm unreliable. Exactly, he said. It's a common pivot. I thought back to the kiddie party. The way she'd framed herself as strong, grieving, resilient. Stories adapt when they're challenged. What's the next move? I asked. Victor leaned forward. We reclaimed the space fully. The following Monday, I returned to the condo alone. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn her. I simply used my key. The place smelled different. Candles. Perfume. Something unfamiliar layered over what used to be home. But it was still mine. I walked through each room slowly. I didn't touch anything at first. I just observed. Photos had been moved. Some were gone entirely. Others replaced with curated memories that didn't include me. The spare room had been turned into an office. My books were stacked in a box labeled miscellaneous. Miscellaneous. I sat down at the kitchen table and waited. She came home an hour later. The sound of the door opening stopped short when she saw me. What are you doing here? She demanded. I'm reclaiming my property, I said evenly. You can't just walk in. I can, I replied. And I did. She dropped her bag hard. This is harassment. This is ownership. We stared at each other across the room. No shouting. No drama. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a lie that had finally run out of room. You're ruining my life, she said. I tilted my head. You told people I didn't have one. She looked away. I'm not here to fight, I continued. I'm here to reset. I handed her an envelope Victor had prepared. What's this? She asked. Formal notice, I said. You have 30 days to vacate. Or we can negotiate a clean exit sooner. Her hand shook slightly as she opened it. You'd really do this, she whispered. You already forced my hand, I replied. She laughed then, bitter. You think this makes you powerful? No, I said honestly. It makes me present. That night, I slept in the condo for the first time in over a year. Not because I missed it, but because it mattered. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Victor. She'd contacted a lawyer. Good. That meant the story wasn't over yet. It meant the truth was about to be tested in a place where narratives don't survive, on paper, under scrutiny, with consequences. And for the first time since I'd learned I was dead, I felt something close to anticipation. Because when someone builds their future on your disappearance, your return doesn't just disrupt their plans. It rewrites them. The legal response arrived faster than I expected. Not a dramatic threat. Not a demand. A request. A carefully worded letter from a mid-sized firm downtown, written in the soft language people use when they're hoping to scare you without actually saying anything enforceable. It claimed emotional distress. Claimed misrepresentation. Claimed I'd created an unsafe environment by appearing unexpectedly. Victor read it once, then smiled. This is a fishing line, Victor said. No hook. What does that mean? I asked. It means the other side doesn't have facts, Victor replied. Only feelings. I sat back. The irony didn't escape me. For months, my existence had been reduced to an inconvenience. Now my presence was suddenly a threat. Victor drafted the response the same afternoon. Short. Polite. Documented. It included copies of the deed, timestamps from the HOA meeting, and a single line that mattered more than all the rest. All future communication must acknowledge the client as living, competent, and sole property owner. That line shut down half the narrative instantly. But narratives don't die quietly. They mutate. Within days, mutual acquaintances started testing the waters. Messages framed as concern. Invitations disguised as peace offerings. Questions that weren't really questions. How are you holding up? Have you thought about forgiveness? Do you really want to take this so far? I answered none of them. Silence isn't weakness when it's deliberate. Behind the scenes, Victor was busy. He requested copies of financial disclosures, cross-referenced statements, pulled utility records. Patterns began to form, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Charges I hadn't authorized. Invoices I'd never seen. Consultations booked using my name. Nothing blatant enough to scream wrongdoing on its own. But together? They told a story. She didn't just erase you socially, Victor said during our next meeting. She was preparing financially. For what? I asked. For a future where you didn't exist to object. The words landed heavier than I expected. I'd assumed the lie was emotional. Maybe even impulsive. I hadn't considered how carefully it had been staged. Victor continued. The good news is, preparation leaves trails. That night, I went back to the condo again. This time, she wasn't there. I opened drawers I hadn't opened in years. Not to invade, just to inventory. To understand what version of reality had been constructed in my absence. Documents were missing. Others had been rearranged. A folder labeled Estate Planning sat in a place it had never belonged. Inside were drafts. Not finalized. Not signed. But imagined. Language about survivorship. About continuity. About honoring memory. Memory. I took photos of everything. Quietly. Methodically. Then I put it all back exactly where I found it. People reveal themselves best when they think no one is watching. 2 days later, Victor called with an update. She's agreed to mediation, Victor said. I paused. Why? Because she believes she can control the room. I almost smiled. Mediation was scheduled for the following week. Neutral location. Neutral mediator. Neutral language. Nothing about it felt neutral. She arrived first. Calm. Composed. Dressed like someone preparing to be misunderstood on purpose. When I entered with Victor, her expression flickered, just once. Recognition. Then control snapped back into place. The mediator began with ground rules. Respect. Listening. No interruptions. She spoke first. She talked about grief. About confusion. About feeling abandoned. She talked about needing closure and protecting her community from difficult truths. I listened without reacting. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I spoke in dates. In documents. In actions. I described finding myself declared dead. I described watching my property treated as an inheritance while I was still breathing. I described the moment I realized my absence had been curated. The mediator's pen slowed. Victor placed the evidence on the table. The drafts. The messages. The timeline. The room changed. She interrupted then. You're twisting this, she said sharply. This wasn't about money. This was about survival. Mine, I said quietly. Or yours? The mediator cleared her throat. We took a break. In the hallway, Victor leaned close. She's losing the thread. Good, I replied. When we reconvened, the tone had shifted. Offers were made. Conditions proposed. She wanted time. She wanted discretion. She wanted the narrative softened. Victor slid a document across the table. This one wasn't about compromise. It was about separation. A clean break. Vacate the condo. No claims. No public statements. In return, I wouldn't pursue damages. She stared at the paper for a long time. This makes me look guilty, she said. No, I replied. It makes you quiet. Her jaw tightened. She signed. The move-out process was tense but controlled. No shouting. No scenes. Just boxes and avoidance. On the final day, I watched her load the last of her things into the car. She didn't look at me. I didn't need her to. After she left, I walked through the condo slowly. Opened windows. Let the air change. The place felt lighter. Not happier. Just honest. Weeks passed. The fallout continued elsewhere. Friend groups reorganized. Stories adjusted. People learned to stop asking questions they didn't want answered. I focused on restoring what had been paused. Work. Sleep. Routine. Then, one afternoon, Victor called again. There's something you should see, he said. It was an email forwarded by mistake. A group message she hadn't meant to include me in. It talked about embarrassment. About humiliation. About how showing up alive ruined everything. I read it once. Then deleted it. Some things don't deserve preservation. The final closure came quietly. A legal confirmation. A corrected record. A life restored to its proper owner. One evening, I sat alone in the condo, lights off, city noise drifting in through the windows. I thought about how easily absence can be weaponized. How silence can be edited. How stories grow bold when they think the subject is gone. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even relieved. I was clear. Clear about who I was. Clear about what I allowed. Clear about what never gets rewritten without consent again. And somewhere in that clarity, something shifted. Because the person who walked into that kiddie party wasn't trying to reclaim a marriage. That person was reclaiming authorship. And the story still wasn't finished. The silence that followed felt unfamiliar, not empty but unoccupied, like a room after furniture has been removed and before anything new is brought in. For the first time in a long while, nothing was being hidden from me, and I wasn't hiding from anything either. The condo no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a document that had finally been corrected. I didn't rush to change anything. No dramatic redecorating, no symbolic gestures. I left the furniture where it was, left the walls bare, left the air neutral. I needed to sit inside the truth for a while before reshaping it. Word traveled slowly after that. Not because people didn't talk, but because no one quite knew how. The version where I was gone had been easy. It required no accountability. The version where I was standing, breathing, and legally present forced people to reconsider their roles in a story they'd accepted without question. A few mutual acquaintances reached out again, more cautiously this time. Apologies wrapped in explanations. Curiosity disguised as concern. I listened when it felt sincere. I declined when it didn't. What surprised me most wasn't the fallout. It was how quickly the noise lost its power once the facts were settled. Truth doesn't argue. It just stands there. Victor and I met one last time to close the file. No ceremony. Just final signatures, confirmations, and a handshake that felt more like punctuation than celebration. You handled this cleanly, Victor said. Most people want spectacle. I wanted accuracy, I replied. He nodded. That's rarer. With the legal chapter closed, the emotional one took longer. Not because I missed her, but because I had to untangle what had actually been real. It's strange how easily a relationship can be reframed when you look at it through hindsight instead of hope. There were signs I'd ignored. Stories she told that never quite lined up. Decisions made without discussion. Small revisions of events that favored her version of things just a little too neatly. I'd mistaken calm for honesty. Familiarity for loyalty. That realization hurt more than the public lie ever did. But pain that clarifies is different from pain that confuses. Weeks turned into months. The condo slowly became mine again, not just on paper but in presence. I started waking earlier. Cooking instead of ordering in. Reading in the evenings instead of scrolling through conversations that no longer mattered. One afternoon, I found the chair. The same one she'd insisted be kept for appearances. The one she'd once joked was symbolic. I carried it to the storage unit and left it there. No ceremony. No anger. Just removal. I didn't hear from her again directly. Everything that needed to be said had already been said, mostly by documents, timestamps, and the absence of further claims. I did hear about her, indirectly. How she told people the situation had been misunderstood. How she framed it as mutual distance rather than deliberate erasure. How she avoided specifics. That was fine. People who rewrite others don't usually survive being edited themselves. What stayed with me wasn't the humiliation she faced, but the lesson I'd learned too late and would never forget: silence doesn't protect you unless it's chosen. When silence is imposed, it becomes permission. I stopped allowing that. The condo eventually sold. Not out of spite, not out of victory, but out of completion. I didn't want to live inside a chapter that had already closed. On the day the papers finalized, I stood by the window one last time. Watched the city move. Watched people who didn't know me live their lives without narratives attached to my name. That anonymity felt earned. I moved to a smaller place closer to work. Fewer rooms. More light. Less history embedded in the walls. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment at the kiddie party. The way conversations froze. The way the room recalibrated itself around the inconvenience of my existence. I don't replay it with satisfaction. I replay it as confirmation. Confirmation that being present matters. That ownership isn't just legal, it's personal. That stories lose their grip when the subject refuses to disappear. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was correcting the record. And once the record was corrected, everything else became optional. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. In mornings without anxiety. In evenings without explanations. In the knowledge that no one could remove me from my own life again without my consent. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: never assume someone's silence means absence. Some people are quiet because they're observing. Some because they're waiting. And some because they're preparing to step back into a story that tried to end without them. I didn't come back to make noise. I came back to exist. And that, it turns out, was more than enough. If you stayed with me through this entire story and it made you think differently about truth, ownership, or the danger of being written out while still standing, consider subscribing and sharing where you're listening from. Stories like this only travel when people recognize themselves inside them.